Good morning and happy happy Sunday. For those of you that are new, welcome, and for those of you that are returning, welcome back to the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, episode number 26. And once again, another Bill's Corner. My name is Bill, and I've been an airline pilot for the past 7 years. I hold 5 FAA type ratings and currently fly the Boeing 737 for a major U.S. airline. Now, normally at this point, I would introduce my excellent co-host Tommy D from Level Flight Simulations, retired York EMT and flight sim extraordinaire. But once again, Tommy D has decided that his life is better than the show. I'm just kidding. Tommy D is celebrating, having a late birthday celebration from his birthday this week, and is, I believe, off in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania today, enjoying his time off. So, Tommy, I hope you're having a wonderful time. But that means everybody's watching. Unfortunately, you're stuck with me today, just like the last Bill Corner. But today, we're going to be doing a little bit of talking about Boeing. Boeing has been coming up a lot recently, and I said it in our past episodes. Tommy and I talk about it a lot. We're still not sure if it's the number of incidents are increasing or if it's just public attention. Now, the big two ones just recently have been Southwest 4096 and Southwest 20. I have the data here in front of me. 2786 in Lihue. So what we're going to do today for Bill's Corner, because Bill's Corners, if this is your first Bill Corner as a watcher or follower of the show, it's not the same format, because our format is generally based around Tommy and I discussing stuff. So it's a little bit different. So today what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be going over the flight data for these aircraft or these incidents per se, with an actual airline pilot, someone who flies a 737. The reason we're doing this is because I've noticed a lot that actually the article that I talked about last week for Aviation News, it was written by a aviation journalist, but it's almost like they're utilizing Boeing's woes in the past to try to emphasize and accentuate their headlines so people will click on their link. Some keywords that I've been noticing in the news about the most recent thing, like especially with the Oklahoma flight just recently with Southwest 4096, I believe it was ABC News was reporting that the airplane plunged to within 500 feet of the ground. And when we review the data, I've already reviewed or looked over the data, but when we review it together today, we're going to look at it and we're going to realize that plunge, I don't know if they know what their definition of plunge is, but we'll take a look at it. And the whole point is to shed light on what is actually happened, not discounting that what happened wasn't pilot error and it needs to be fixed, but more so giving you the actual objective analysis based off the data, same data that the news media has. We're just going to be going over that today. So, and you get it from a pilot's perspective, because right now it feels like everybody in media, whether it's news, whether it's journalism, they're going after Boeing, and they'll use Boeing in the headlines just to make people go click on the link, even though that it's not a Boeing issue necessarily. In both instances here, it could have been an Airbus too. It has nothing to do with the fact that it is an actual Boeing aircraft. So, without further ado, let me share this screen here. Got the data analysis up here. So don't worry, I'm going to go through, I'm going to explain all this sort of stuff as we go through, and I'll zoom in and all that jazz. So what we're looking at right here is on April 11th, Southwest 2786 from Honolulu to Lihue, Hawaii. So Honolulu, Lihue is an inter-island operational flight that they did. This is the one where they say that they plunged within 400 feet of the ocean. Okay, so actually, let me just do this real quick. I'm going to go back one page here. And so this is the live flight track data here. I'm going to bring this up. This is their actual flight path. Okay, so they departed Honolulu, went up to the northeast, getting vectors. It's a super short flight. Lihue's not that far from Honolulu. Looked like they got vectored over to the west for an approach to runway, looks like 17 most likely, and 17, you'll see I have the approach plate I'll pull up, is not a straight on approach because of the terrain here. Right about here, according to the internal Southwest Airlines memo, they missed because of visibility. They couldn't see the runway, completely normal. And then according to this, looks like they executed a pretty normal go around, held, and then returned back to Honolulu. Okay, so that's what the flight path, kind of the top down looks like. So, but let's go look at the track log real quick. There it is, track log. All right. So this is a track log, right? Now keep in mind this is ADS-B data, so it's snapshot data. It's not anything like the actual flight data recorder or anything like that. That's the big thing I want to emphasize is all the articles I've read, they're like, yeah, it's plunged to 4,400 feet per minute towards the ocean, within 400 feet of the ocean. I don't know where they're getting that data because that data is not flight data recorder. FDR data is strictly to the company and NTSB if they're investigating it. And then later on in a report, it'll get released, but very rarely does that information or that data get directly released to the public. I'll be talking a lot, so don't mind the blue sippy cup. I'm sipping my coffee out of there this morning. All right, so as you can see, this is a pretty normal. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit so y'all can. It's blown up here. All right, we're gonna ignore the 500 miles an hour. We don't really calculate our speeds in miles an hour. What we're really looking at here is the flight path. Okay, so the incident that we're referring to with 2976 or 2786, excuse me, is right here. It's this dip right here. So you can see that they took off from Honolulu, leveled off. It looks like, let's see, let me zoom, see if I can get that on screen too. There we go. At about 15,000 feet, had a nice gradual descent, probably leveled off to intercept the final approach course. Had a descent, and at the lowest point, at least according to ADS-B data, shows 875 feet. Now I want to emphasize that Hawaii is at sea level, okay? All the reports, all the news articles said that this aircraft got within 400 feet of the ocean. In terms of data that's available, it's showing 800 feet. We'll just keep that in mind. So 800 feet, they don't have it. This area right here, this small area between, this says, well, this is based off Central Time, but midnight 30 Central Time and there is when they went around and had the incident. They did overshoot their missed approach altitude just a little bit, came back down, leveled, and then, climbed out, and then returned safely to Honolulu. So as you can see, it's not that bad of a flight pattern. I don't see a plunge in there. Over here off the right, you can, here, I'll zoom in. Whoa. Sorry. I'll try to zoom in right here. So right here at the end is kind of what a normal, if you will, a normal approach would look like, right? 3-degree glide path. Now, there are some instances out there. Oh, why did that just... Pardon me, folks. My computer is being interesting. All right. What is this thing doing? Sorry, folks. Just got to adjust old TikTok here because TikTok is, as I've said before, is just an absolute pain to work with. So give me just a second, and I will adjust this for us here. There we go. There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay. So we just zoom this out again. All right. So this is what it's. So that's a gradual descent, but that's also probably long 3 degrees. So there is a little bit steeper over here, but Lahui might have a steeper descent because of the actual terrain that's on the island. Now, keep in mind, I have flown to Lahui, so I am familiar. I landed the opposite runway when I was there. So from just looking at this, I don't see anything major in terms of, because they claimed in the article that, that they dropped 4,400 feet per minute, and then they climbed at 8,500 feet per minute. Well, let's take a look at that. So that's just after, let's call it 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. That's what this is based off, is off CDT. So let's look at the track data. So what we're looking at here is we got the time in Central Daylight Time, lat longs, the course, airspeed in knots. This is ground speed. They don't have the actual indicated airspeed on here. Miles per hour conversion, calibrated altitude. So if you look where they started in Honolulu, it's 0 to 0. If they were landing at a higher elevation, it may terminate higher, but generally speaking, we can assume this is above sea level. And then the feet, and then over here on the right, we have the climb rate. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but that is the climb rate over there. So that's kind of like the big one that I am looking at is the climb rate off the right too, because a lot of people are just like, oh, the climb rate's, it's a huge issue, blah, 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 and it's not really. So let me just do this real quick. There we go. Make it a little bit bigger for you all over on the TikTok side of things here. Sorry, guys. TikTok is just being hateful this morning. There we go. Just get this all squared away so you guys can see everything. There we go. And TikTok does not play nice with any other streaming application, so hence the janky way of getting this displayed here. Let's get this up and running here. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that, because a lot of the news articles are saying, oh yeah, they dove at 4,400 feet, blah blah. All right, so we see them down here. We take them off, taking off from Honolulu, standard climb rates. Yeah, I see up here up to 3,500 feet a minute. That's normal in the climb, depending on how light the winds, etc. They get to cruise around 16,000 feet. They start their normal descent around 11:57 p.m. Central Time. About 1,300 feet at flight altitude. You can get anywhere up to like 3,000 feet depending on your airspeed. You see them start come down, and here's that level off 3,000 feet where I expect that they're getting ready for the vectors onto the final approach course. You see a little bit climb, a little bit descend. That's probably consistent with either radar, the ADS-B error, with like altimetry, or it just may be turbulence, just small variations. And then you see them start their descent nice and easy. We're looking at max 1,000 feet per minute, which is all within stabilized approach criteria, all within stabilized approach. 771 feet per minute. Then they get to the stabilized approach criteria, still stabilized at 800 feet. 950. Okay, so at 875, you see them start climbing again, right? So from here is where they reverse, and that is a pretty large gap if you look at the time. So between 31 and 47, so that's a 16-minute gap in data. So it's very possible in that 16-minute gap that's where that 400 feet came from. But as you can see, it goes from 950, which is about 1,000 feet, and then the next ding they get is at 1240 or 1212. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. It's 16 seconds, not 16 minutes. So 16 seconds. So not a whole lot of time. So here you see them reverse it. I don't know if you can see it here off the right. 397 feet per minute starts the climb. Then they start climbing, and you see 3,800 feet. And then you see them at 4,500 feet. And then they overshoot their altitude a little bit for level off. For the go around, it's 3,600 feet. And then they settle it back down around 32. They descend back down until they're at 3,000 feet. I don't see any plunging here. I see a stabilized approach. Let's see. I see a stabilized approach down to about 875 feet. Now, granted, if you're descending, let's say they were descending about 800 feet a minute, right? So 800 feet a minute, that's 400 feet every 30 seconds. And then if you divide that in half again, so 200 feet per 15 seconds. So there could be, this is roughly about a 16-second difference. So you're talking about from 950 to 875 is where they start the climb. So from here, if they were descending at that rate, right, so 800 feet, so 200 feet, they would get down around like 750-ish or so. But it's what I'm indicating is what is completely normal go around minus the overshoot. That might have been as a startled reaction to what had happened previously. Now, let me try to pull up here. Let me pull up the approach chart. I did have the approach chart up here. Let's see if it'll let me show it. I got to readjust here so you guys can get an idea of the approach that I'm talking about. Let's share. And then I'm going to just do that. Okay, it's kind of a small. Here, let me see if I can adjust that a little bit so you guys can get a bigger view. I know TikTok is doing something janky, so I apologize. Once again, I'm just trying to get you guys a good view of the approach blade here that we can take a look at, so you kind of understand, because the news was reporting that they were within 400 feet of the ocean, and I hate to break it to you, when we're landing in an airplane, sometimes we're within a lot closer than that to the ocean. Actually, we'll do this. Like I said, sorry folks. Usually I don't have this many tabs and stuff up to show you stuff, so that's why this is getting a little a little interesting here on the old TikTok here. Try to resize the window as I go along here. It's not going well. Actually, why don't I just do There we go. That's a little bit better. All right, cool. That'll work. That works out a little bit better just so you guys can kind of see both. Okay, so we're looking at the Lihue, Hawaii RNAV 17 approach. Okay, so we can see that they came in over Kobik at above 3,000, which was fine. Initial approach fix, as you can see, it's that kind of slow curving. It's not a straight approach. There's a lot of terrain out to the west in Lihue. And then the missed approach, as you can see, is out this direction, out to Nagai, and hold out here. Now, if we look here, what we're looking at is in the 737, we don't do, I guess, LNAV MDA. We have LNAV VNAV minimums, but which is maybe just a little bit of a different chart on here. This is just a generic one from the FAA ones. But if you look at here, you're looking at 842 feet, right? 800 feet. So, and we're usually over in this category. So that what this means is that the minimums for them to see the airport is 842 feet above sea level, which is 800 feet above the actual elevation of the airport. Because once again, Hawaii is at sea level. So the data that we were looking at showed them going around at 850 feet, which kind of honestly makes sense because that means they didn't have the runway at 800 feet. Now, where the data gap exists, and I don't know where the media gets this, they say it's within 400 feet of the ocean. Where? I mean, they're going to be down here, at 800 feet doing the approach, right? And the way we do it, since we do on the 730, do it in VNAV, is basically we treat that as a missed approach point from there. But generally, you could be down here cruising, and then technically you don't go miss until the missed approach point, and then you're climbing out up to, let's see, missed approach here is 3,000 feet direct, Nagai and hold. Okay, so, and let's go back. Let's see here. See if I can do this without resizing every single window known to man. Let's see. There we go. That's cool. Now I figure out how to switch it without having to close and open the screen. Okay, so we go back here, and like I said, you don't see a very rapid descent. I think somewhere in the article I was reading, they said they descended at 4,400 feet per minute. I did not see that data anywhere on here other than, and not even an unstable descent. It was a very stable descent into what was the missed approach. So, once again, here it is. The incident that we're looking at is right here. Right where that red line is. And off to the right is another approach that went into Honolulu when they diverted. So, my two cents is from an airline pilot, because there was a Southwest memo that came out that explained what happened. And what happened is the first officer who was flying was inexperienced going to the airport, and the captain wanted him to get the experience, which is fair. Lihui's not like a super special airport. It's just a short field landing. It is challenging. They did brief up the approach, and according to the memo, they were expecting to not be able to see the runway, so they were planning on going around. They got down to minimums on the approach, didn't have the runway, went around. Now, what happens is, you click there's a set of buttons on the thrust levers that we hit to engage the go around, and you start your go around. Now, the initial sensation a lot of times is that you're pitching up, especially when you don't have any sort of reference to the horizon of the actual, like the Earth's horizon. We call it IMC. There's a tendency when you accelerate to feel like you're pitching up. It's called a somatographic illusion. There's a little set of hairs in the inner ear where the fluid is that senses linear acceleration. That's why if you close your eyes on an airplane and you're deaccelerating, you feel like the nose is going down. And if you accelerate, it feels like the nose is going up, even though you're straight and level. So in this instance, the first officer pushed forward on the control yoke during the go-around instead of pulling aft. I don't know why that would happen. The only thing I could think of was because of a somatographic illusion where they thought that they were pitching up. But then the first officer noticed that they were going to overspeed the flaps, because that's what happens when you add thrust and keep the nose level. And then in response to avoid overspeeding the flaps, the first officer pulled back on the thrust to reduce speed. Well, the combination of reducing thrust and pitching forward in an aircraft results in a descent. So that's the error that occurred. Now, where the gray area is where they noticed the issue and how quickly they regained or noticed the issue and then called the go around. So in the Southwest memo, I can't remember if I read it or not. There is a possibility that they did get GPWIS, which is ground proximity warning system alerts. But those are extremely sensitive when you're close in and low. So, for example, I want to say it was ABC News said they were plunging at 4,400 feet per minute. I haven't seen it in the data. It's not on this data, which is, I believe this is the data that's available to them. The thing is momentary, very small momentary control inputs can cause large fluctuations in like feet per minute and data like that. So it could have been just a slight push. It might have been even just that initial push that the first officer did, and the captain may have quickly realized it and called the issue, and they did the go round. Well, even that little push could have caused the 4,400 feet per minute data point, but also it could have triggered the GPWIS based off their altitude, airspeed, and where they're at. And Lahui on that approach, if you noticed, it had to do like a dog leg off to the left here. There you go. You can see how it has the dog leg here down on the bottom, where it goes off the left here. That's because of the terrain down here. So it's very possible that there was a momentary instance where the first officer did that, the captain corrected it, but because of either the sudden push or the push and the GPWIS database, because of all the terrain here, might have indicated that they got, a GPWIS pull up or a too low terrain indication. And if we get a pull up, we have to do what's called an escape procedure, which is a max performance climb, which could be consistent, which definitely could be consistent with this. I think it was like a 4,500 foot climb at the end that we were just looking at. Let's see. That's 12. Right here, this 4,400 foot per minute climb. I mean, that is excessive. A standard go around, if you follow the flight directors, one click of the toga buttons is 1,000 feet per minute. A maximum performance go around targets 2,000 feet per minute. So this is more than double of that. So that, I'm wondering if that might have been in response to the terrain warnings, which is a fair response, right? A lot of people may look at this and be like, oh, this is out of control. It's not. It's them responding to something. So, this is my 2 cents in it. This is, based off the data that I have, which is all the same data that the media has. I do personally think that they're utilizing the fact that, one, it's a Boeing to make headlines and have people click on their journalistic ambitions. So all the journalists are having people click on their online articles. I think that's a big thing here too that we got to be cautious about, because it is a Boeing. That's all that Southwest operates. But also just the use of words. The aircraft plunging. The aircraft got within 400 feet. Well, the aircraft was within 400 feet of the ocean, probably because it was trying to land. But also that momentary pushover may have got it down to 400 feet, but it's one of those things, looking at the data that here in front of me, it's not as serious, I don't think, necessarily as the media is making it out to be, unfortunately. So that is that is Southwest 2786. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is a more recent one. I got to go, I'm going to hide this real quick. I have it saved up here in my tabs. Oh, no, I don't know why that just did that. The computer's just choosing violence today. All right, we're gonna go look at Southwest 4069. That happened. Let's see. I believe that was on the 18th. Let me make sure I get the right one up here. Yes, so it was a red eye. Here, I'll do this here. All right, so the next one we're talking about is Southwest 4069. That's the most recent one. This was as of June 18th, 2024. It was a red eye from Las Vegas, Nevada to Oklahoma City. So it departed there at 8 p.m. and then arrived in Will Rogers or Oklahoma City Airport at 12:21 a.m. Okay. So this one, the media is just like, within 500 feet of a flight school, and they got a low altitude alert from ATC, which is all true technically, but once again, the word plunges, and Boeing is a big one in there. Boeing aircraft, so everybody's like, oh my God, what's going on with Boeing? It's not necessarily Boeing is the point I keep trying to make. So let's zoom in here real quick. You can kind of see in terms of flight path. They come all the way over from Vegas. It's a little bit of weather, and there was a little bit of weather northwest of Oklahoma City there when they arrived. But you can see here, it looked like they set up an approach for, I forgot which runway that is. It looks like maybe like a 1331 runway. Yeah, and they looked, and it looks like about right here is probably where they got that low altitude alert and decided to go around. And then they came back and then went for runway 17, right? So this I still don't know. There hasn't been any sort of internal memos that's been released. We don't know what caused this. But what we can do is let's just look at some data real quick. So the key thing I'm trying to point out here is the media is saying, oh, they plunged out of the sky. And only 500 feet above a high school. Well, let's take a look at the track. Let's see. Track log here. Once again, we're going to be looking at this. Okay. As you can probably tell, very normal flight path, right? You get up, take off, cruising altitude for a long time because Las Vegas to Oklahoma City is not a short flight. You start a gradual descent, level off. If that thing can get off. Is it going to get off? I don't think it's going to get off. You can see them slowing down commensurate with an approach. Right there is where the issue occurred. And Oak City's 1,300 feet. So they got as low as 400 feet off the ground, according to ADSB. And you can see them get slow, and then you can see them do the go-around, regain speed, reset for the approach, slow down again, and then commence the approach. So nothing here is drastic. In fact, the one in Lahui was a little more drastic in terms of how the graph looked. Now, if you look at the actual track data here, let's see. Yeah, so you can, all this is normal descent rate. And then they get down around, here we go. So I'm looking, so this is about 1,300 feet above field elevation. We're looking for less than 1,000 feet per minute. Or actually, wait, is that the second round or the first round? Yeah, okay. So we're looking 220 knots descending, 797. This is roughly about 2,000 feet above ground level. Looks very stabilized. Looks like they stopped momentarily. Okay, so this is where they stopped momentarily right here. So you can see it very stabilized. And then, see if I can zoom in so you guys can see this a little bit better. There we go. So we get right here, 2,900 feet is roughly, would be 1,600 feet above ground level. So that's usually around the final approach fix altitude here. And that was the go-around. So right here is where that incident occurred. You can see where the descent reversed into a climb. They got, according to ADSB data, 1,700 feet, which is roughly 400 feet above ground level. So that is pretty low. And if we look at a map, I did do the map where they were showing where they were supposed to be. Here, let me pull that up real quick. Sorry, guys, it's all zoomed in here. There we go. So that instance, let me zoom it in here. That instance is right there. Okay. So this is where they were when it occurred. Now, I did go onto Google Maps. I did use the measuring tool and see to where exactly that was on final to Will Rogers Airport. That's roughly, probably right there is just beyond, I would probably say about 7 to 8 nautical miles. And a 3-to-1 rule means you need to be 2,400 feet above the ground at that position for a 3-degree glide path, and 2,400 feet plus the 1,300. So we're looking at, let's say 13 plus 24. So 3,700 feet is where they should have been. So they're about 2,000 feet low. Now, let's do this real quick. I can go to AirNav real quick. Let me pull that up. AirNav, good old airnav.com. And we'll look up the approach plate, what they were doing, because that's the nice thing about being an airline pilot is everything. If there's an approach, you have to back it up, the visual approach with that. And as far as I was aware, it was visual. So let's look at for the RNAV. Runway 13 is what they look like they were attempting to do. So there we go. So this is the RNAV GPS runway 13 at Will Rogers in Oak City. So they probably came in here from Laramie, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Yeah, they probably came in here from Laramie and then came down. Yeah, and then to Eluk. So if we look at it from the runway here, actually probably better to do is with this. Okay. So I said roughly like 2,700-ish feet. So here's 1.4. That's 5 miles. Let's see, 4 miles, right? 2.6 was 1.4. So 4 miles is the final approach fix. And then out here, which is Weybut, 4 plus 4, so 8.7, 4,000 feet is Weybut, which is probably roughly where they were supposed to be. That is out this direction right here. So they actually, now that I'm thinking, they probably came out here somewhere and did the arrival in. But right here at Weybut, you're supposed to be out above 4,000, which is, I would say, is probably about roughly where they were. And they were at 1,700 feet, so they were well below. There's a couple of things that could have caused that. Like I said, I'm not trying to Monday morning armchair quarterback, I think is the phrase. But there's a lot of things that can get you in this field. So, or in the 737 specifically the VNAV. Looking at this, there's a couple things you have to do to protect yourself. But if they descended early, for example, and never really caught up to the vertical navigation path, which we can see in there in our actual flight deck, and they never caught up to it, they were constantly beneath it, and they were setting the altitudes lower and lower and lower. It is distinctly possible that the aircraft would have been descending at about 1,000 feet per minute below path, and as long as you're in VNAV, it should stop you. But if they're not in VNAV or using any sort of other function other than VNAV, it is very distinctly possible that it'll blow through those altitudes, or if they didn't verify that the altitudes were correct. There's a lot of different things that could have happened that would have resulted in that, or if it's a visual approach. If they were hand flying, like I said, there's not a whole lot of information since it was so recent about what caused this. But what we do know is that they were in a steady rate of descent, what I would consider stabilized, but well below, 2013, let's see, 4,000 minus 1,700 feet. What is that? 2737. So 2,300 feet beneath where they were supposed to be. And that's where it was concerning, is that they decided to do, not they decided, but they did that, and then they had to go around. Luckily, Will Rogers in this part of the country is all super, super flat. So they had absolutely no issue doing the go-around. Oop. So I'm just going to pull that out so you can see it here. They had absolutely no issue doing the go-around, because right around there, they got the low altitude alert from air traffic control, and it looked like they went around, climbed back up, and then reset up for what appears to be 1.8, right? 1.7, right, in Oklahoma City. So it, like I said, I don't know too much because there's not a much. The only data's out here is this, and granted, it is concerning. It's not supposed to be happening. Things like this are not supposed to be happening. But the point of this podcast and this episode, this Bill's Corner, is to point out that it appears that media is trying its best to scare people from flying, period, whether it be mostly on Boeing, just because of the amount of scrutiny that Boeing, and rightfully so, that Boeing has had recently. But they're utilizing it to up their ratings. They're utilizing it to get clicks on their articles. So it's just, you got to be kind of careful when that sort of stuff, because I hear it all the time. If it wasn't an Airbus, so I'm fine. Blah blah. This could have been an Airbus. This could have been a Bombardier. Well, not Bombardier, but it could be an Airbus. It could be, I'm trying to think of other jets there. It could have been an Embraer. It could have been some. This had nothing to do with it being Boeing specific. It had everything to do with pilot error. And that's the only thing I could see here in Oklahoma City, is that's 100% pilot error, unless there was maybe something wrong with the flight management computer. But it's really hard. As long as you verify the points and you fly the approach appropriately, it's really hard to mess those up. Even if you were to dial in the bottom altitude, stay in VNAV path, for example, as long as all the altitudes are in there, even if you're below the path and you set the bottom altitude, the airplane in VNAV path will level off at those altitudes to protect you. So maybe they were trying to get down quickly and left in a level change, maybe left in vertical speed or something where they weren't in VNAV path, and it caused them to blow through the altitudes like that. So I really do think this might be a pilot error error situation with programming the flight management computer to be able to fly the RNAV approach. It's a little bit different than if you were flying, for example, an ILS approach, because you're based on ground-based navigation aids versus a GPS type approach. So, like I said, that is coming from myself, who is a 737 pilot myself. I have flown the 737 going on, 2.5 years now. I started flying it back in 21, 22, somewhere around there. Nearly 1,500 hours on it. Nowhere near as many hours as the people I fly with, the captains I fly with. Some of them have 11,000, tens of thousands of hours on the aircraft. But my point is just I want to take this time on Bill's Corner to kind of talk about it a little bit so you guys get a actual perspective from a person who flies the airplane versus what the media is telling you. Because a lot of times it's like the media, not to ramp on the media, it's just they don't know what they're talking about a lot of times. The aviation is such a complex topic that you can't just be like, oh, they plunged, and then not back it up. Plunge is not an aviation term. Rapid descent, well, it depends on what part of the flight path you're on. If you're descending on a star or a rival, sometimes depending on the winds and depending on your descent speed that's programmed there, you could get up to like a 3,000 feet per minute descent in a 737. That's normal. And that's because it's programmed to do a flight idle descent. So if you tell it to do 320 knots in the descent, it's going to descend a lot quicker at 320 knots than it is at 280 knots because it's a flight idle, which means the thrust levers are all the way back. Descend. It just pitches over to maintain that airspeed. But if you're talking about on an approach, anything in stabilized approach trajectory, especially lower than 1,000 feet above field level, you're looking for about, on average, zero wind for a transport category aircraft, probably about 800 feet per minute, but no more than 1,000 feet, plus or minus 300 feet for bracketing and wind and stuff like that. So, that's excessive down there. But once again, I feel like the media, unfortunately, it's not only dramatizing what's happening out here, because it is good reporting. Like it's people do need to know about this. It's a error that has occurred twice within a month, so it is a trending error, unfortunately, at Southwest. But it's not. It shouldn't be fear mongering. We should be striving to try to understand what causes these incidents and then try to fix them, because that's the only way to create and continue to create a safe flying environment, not trying to terrify the public from flying, if that makes sense. So with that being said, I'm going to look through our live chat so for our quick live listener Q&A, which I do on Bill's Corner. What's up, Riley? How's it going? Cosmic Destiny, thanks for the follow. And Yaku, I think is your name. Thank you for sharing the live. Good morning, Aviation Geek. And Aviation Geek says the media makes it into big drama series. Yeah, not all the time. I feel like it's just been recently. And like I said, it seems like junior reporters, or if the news is slow and it has to do with the Boeing, then it's big news. So, for example, like if like in Lohui, Hawaii, the head on Simple Flying, I want to say the headline was Boeing 737 MAX 8 plunges towards ocean. Had nothing to do, but the headline was Boeing 737, right? It wasn't an Airbus, or it wasn't a Southwest flight, close call with ocean. It had to be Boeing. Same thing with the articles about this. It's Boeing about Oklahoma with Southwest 49.6. It's Boeing did this, Boeing did that. Well, Southwest Airlines operates Boeing, so yeah, any incident that Southwest has is going to be a Boeing. But if it was an Airbus, you know what I mean, that people wouldn't be paying as much attention about it. So I feel like it's the catchphrase of the year, of the past couple of years, is Boeing. And like I said, rightfully so. Boeing has had some instances where safety has been brought up, and if Boeing needs to make aircraft safer, then they need to make the aircraft safer. Perfect example is the MAX aircraft. They designed a aircraft without a critical redundant system, which just means that they had a system that was critical that didn't have a redundancy to it, and it killed a bunch of people with the first two crashes. I 100% agree that was Boeing's fault and that they needed to fix it. The door flying off the MAX 9, that's a culture thing. That's something that happened when they outsourced a lot of their building of the aircraft outside of the factory in Washington State. So yes, Boeing does need to be held accountable for all these issues. However, being devil's advocate here, when it comes to things like this, where it is pilot error and not necessarily excuse me, whereas pilot error and not like specifically a Boeing issue. Give credit, I guess, when due, because it's not when due, but don't credit the issue to Boeing when it's not a Boeing issue. Let's see the other comments in here. Sorry, guys. I'm curious why they choose runway 13. It's hardly ever used for landings. I saw maybe 4 in 10 years. Well, honestly, coming from that direction and where the runway ends, it's more efficient to land on that runway and then immediately pull off to the gate. I could understand why they do that. That's because that's thinking like an airline pilot. How do I get these folks quickest to the gate safely? And that's to use that runway because they're coming from that direction. It's less of a vector. And once they land, it's a short taxi. It's a left turnoff, and you're right there at the gate. So it saves time versus landing on the south runways, and then you go all the way past that runway and then have to come back and taxi up. So I could understand why they were doing that. Let's see, that's a huge gap in altitude. Yes, ground prox warning, they may not have. So the way ground prox warning is not an active radar system is a large database of what they call floors for terrain. So if you could picture a airport is at the bottom of the bowl, and then it goes out like this. And if you ever penetrate one of those walls, I guess, is when you get the JIPWIS alert. So if they were within 8 miles and there wasn't really any sort of terrain that they would have to worry about for it to trigger, then they might have not got one. But ATC has a fail-safe called a minimum altitude alert, which they have what's called minimum vectoring altitudes. Those are altitudes that aren't known to us, but those are the lowest altitudes they could descend us for approaches and stuff. And if you go below that, they get a low altitude alert, which is a safety system, which is triggered, which is what it's for, is exactly what it's for. Let's see. Right, the gates are there. So, okay, Jerry says, so when the other pilots here talk about the Boeing problem, are they scared about flying the Boeing? I don't think so. So I obviously fly the Boeing. I haven't ever really felt unsafe flying the Boeing. It's always been a solid airplane. Like, for example, I was out on the road when there was the rudder guidance came out, when they found in the MAX 9s that some of the bolts didn't have the nuts on the other side in the rudder assembly. I think it was specifically to the PCU, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember I was in Fort Myers when that happened, and I was like, oh, God, I hope they inspect this airplane, right? Because basically the FAA said, okay, you guys got to go through and inspect your airplanes. And I'm like, oh, please, just please have inspected this airplane, because the last thing I want to do is go flying and then my rudder fall off. But I also think part of my comfort with flying is I trust our maintenance staff, because our maintenance at my airline is amazing. Because at like 2 or whatever in the morning, they got out there and inspected the airplane. We're supposed to fly out to Fort Myers that morning. So by the time we got to the airplane at like 6 a.m., it had already been inspected, and they found that the rudder assembly was assembled correctly, or that the bolt, the nut to the bolt was there. So it's one of those things. It's like I'm not scared to fly the Boeing, because if there is something wrong with it, I know our maintainers or myself or the cat will find it first before we go flying, if that makes sense. So when those problems happen, is it the airline's fault? Jerry, I don't know if you're talking about like the incidents with Southwest Airlines, or if it's the incident or Boeing in general, but the 2 incidents with Southwest Airlines are pilot error. We know the one in Lahui is pilot error. The second one, I am assuming and making an educated guess that it is probably pilot error as well. And that may not necessarily be the airline, but it is the responsibility of the airline to ensure those pilots are retrained appropriately to make sure it doesn't happen again. So with that being said, folks, thank you guys for the great questions. But that is where we're going to wrap Bill's Corner for today, episode number 26, the second Bill's Corner in the series. I was not anticipating having to do a solo podcast today because Tommy's significant other dropped it on him, I guess, last minute Friday, and that's when he told me. So I apologize if it seems kind of roughly put together, but that's what I wanted to make sure that you guys were able to hear from me, an airline pilot, about all the things that are going on, especially with the Boeing. Just to make sure, and like I said, do everything with a fine-tooth, go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Just make sure that you're understanding the data more than anything. The data on FlightAware, it's free to sign up for an account. You can go 3 months back. That's where I grabbed all the data for Southwest 2786, and it largely helps you kind of understand what actually went on. And then always wait. If not that, always wait for the final report, because what I'm finding more and more is that news media is reporting inaccurately, especially when it comes to aviation incidents, more for clicks and then actual accuracy. So with that, folks, that's going to wrap episode number 26, Bill's Corner. Thank you guys for watching. If you do enjoy the show, please on whatever platform you're on, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, whatever you're listening on, please make sure to go and rate the show. Tommy and I were the number 57th aviation podcast in the world, according to Apple Podcasts, in December, and we are trying our best to get back to that. If you're currently watching live on whether it's TikTok, Kick, Twitter, Twitch, or YouTube, please go to our podcast page on Apple Podcast, or if you don't have that, on Spotify, and rate the show. It's real easy to do. It's free to do. Just Google Torque and Thrust Talk Show. We're the top 25 results that pop up. If you just go and find, I believe with Spotify, at the top of the page, there's 3 little dots. If you click on that, you'll see an option to rate us. And then if you're on Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the very bottom, and there's an option to give us a rating down there. You can also follow us on social media. Torque and Thrust Talk Show is scrolling right here underneath. We're on Twitter, so Torque, the letter N, Thrust, TS, for all sorts of updates. We do post on there. We try to do it daily, but at least weekly, with gaming updates and aviation news updates as well. And then you can also follow myself and Tommy D on social media. I am Captain Bill Official. I'm on TikTok, YouTube, and Twitch, and Tommy as well on those platforms, which is at Level Flight Simulations. As of right now, I need to talk to Tommy about scheduling our next month. I just got my schedule, so next month's our show's next month, but you can probably expect it probably around midweek next week at the same time, 10 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. And so you guys could definitely plan on that for next week. Just kind of keep an eye out for our announcement and our schedule updates as well. But on behalf of the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, I am Bill, and I will see you next week.